Okay, greetings everyone. Thanks for showing up. If you have questions, go ahead and you can interrupt me or you can put them in the chat, and occasionally I'll go over to the chat and check for questions. My name is Steve Wallace. I work for Internet2, and we have an initiative called the Internet2 Routing Integrity Initiative, and essentially it is the goal of this initiative to make sure that data on the internet doesn't get diverted, and your internet connections are not put in some sort of delay or outage due to routing security issues. I'm going to tell you a story about something that really happened last summer, and I'm going to show you what it took to mitigate that, to fix it, and what it would have taken to prevent it. And then I'm going to invite you to schedule a meeting with me so that we can together, if you want, do the same thing for your networks to protect your networks. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So last summer, I was actually on vacation and I was checking my email, which I guess is a bad habit. And I got this interesting email from a network, and I can't say what state the network was from, but I got this email saying, we have this /16, and we give some of the blocks to our members to use, and some of the addresses seem to be have been hijacked by a network in the Philippines, essentially. And what this note doesn't say, but what happened was this state network provided IP addresses for the main web servers for the state. So you can think of www.statename.gov kind of email addresses or web server addresses. So they had provided IP addresses that were used by their state's top level web services. So these were, all of the major online services of the state were down because the network in the Philippines, either intentionally or accidentally, started using their IP addresses. And someone who works for that state network had remembered a presentation I did about this obscure thing called an RPKI-ROA, and thought that that might be helpful. And they sent me this note, and I reached out to them, and yes, it is not only helpful in this case, it is the only thing that you can do. And to get this protection for your network, all you have to do is fill out this form. The only things on the form that you put in place are for a particular IP network, you list the origin AS, what's the valid origin AS, and you list the network, and you can optionally give this record a name, and you complete this online form through ARIN's portal, and that's it. You fill this form out, and it protects your network from what happened in this example last summer. So that's all there is to it. You don't do any network configuration. There's no equipment you have to change, no configuration on any network here. You literally just fill out this form. You're already paying for the service. It is really pretty simple to do, but there's one major caveat. If you fill the form out wrong, then it can take your network connection down. So you have to get it perfectly right. And you might fill this form out, and you may never fill it out again for your entire career. And so it's not like people get very much experience filling this form out. And so part of what I'm offering is to help fill this out with you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the story and how it works. But the message is your networks are at risk. They're at risk from being hijacked. That could mean a network outage. It could be a man-in-the-middle attack that you didn't detect. It could be hackers using parts of your IP addresses to source spam email, which causes a reputational problem for your network. These things can happen in ways that you don't notice. So for example, A hacker might notice that there is a particular subnet that doesn't get much internet traffic, and maybe they start using the IP addresses just from that subnet for 10 minutes, where they source a bunch of spam email. And you don't even notice that this is happening. And there's no other way to prevent it than to create these records. And so that's it's pretty easy to create the record. You have to create it correctly, or you risk taking your internet connection down. But I'm happy to help you create the record. So among the members of KeystoneREN who have everything in place that they literally just need to fill the form out. In other words, they have IP resources from ARIN and they have an ARIN agreement. These are the institutions that, from my vantage point, what I can tell, have IP addresses, can get the protection by filling out the form, have not filled out the form. Now, a little bit more about what is this thing. RPKI is a public key infrastructure for IP numbers, both internet numbers, both IP numbers and autonomous system numbers. And a ROA is a Route Origin Authorization. What a ROA is, it is a digitally signed document that says, if you see this particular route, the origin network needs to be this origin network. And if it's not that origin network, this is an invalid route and your network should not use it. Network operators like Internet2 and most commercial internet service providers use this information to protect your network. So there are things that we have configured in the Internet2 network, and there are things that your ISPs have configured in their networks to protect your network from being hijacked. But you have to fill out the form, or these features don't apply to you. They're not required. If you haven't filled this out, what it means is you're just not receiving the protection. But there's no actual requirement to fill these out. So they're created in a web portal through what's known as your regional internet registry. And for people in the US and Canada, the regional internet registry is ARIN. What's required, and I showed you what was on the form, is the prefix has to be covered by an ARIN agreement, which is called a registration services agreement. There are a number of institutions in our community that received their IP addresses before ARIN existed. And across the Internet2 community, about 35% of the IP addresses don't have this agreement. So they received the addresses before ARIN existed, and they've never signed the ARIN agreement. But if you were on that list a couple slides back, you have IP addresses that are on an agreement, but you don't have ROAs. You haven't filled out this form, so we can help protect your network. To actually fill that form out, you have to have access to your ARIN account, and there are different roles in the ARIN account. In other words, you can have the administrator role, which is sort of the overall role that allows you to do everything in that account. There's a tech role, and that can also create ROAs. And there's also a routing role. And this is a way of limiting what a person can do within the account to just the routing security functions like creating ROAs. And there are some Internet2 regional networks that will offer to maintain their members' ROAs, offer to fill that form out and to maintain it. And the way that works is the university that has the IP addresses will identify someone at the regional network as a routing point of contact. And so essentially you're giving them agency to do certain things in your ARIN account, but only those things related to routing security. So there are a few networks, I think Mornet and iLight are examples where they will create and maintain these records for their members. It's just this form. There are a couple of ways to fill it out. But it's pretty straightforward to fill out. Where is the form? So if you log into your ARIN account, you go to the dashboard. On the left, you'll see routing security. And if you select routing security, it will show you the organizations that you're associated with. And for each organization identifier you're associated with, on the very right column here, sort of the status you're in, whether you can create ROAs or not, will be here. So if you have something that says sign up for RPKI, that means you have never done this before, but you actually have the agreement with ARIN. And you can select sign up for RPKI-ROA. And ARIN gives you two options for doing this. I know of no example within our community where they pick delegated RPKI. So large internet providers and large cloud providers, they maintain their own RPKI system. And when they go in here, they tell ARIN, we want you to point to our system where we maintain these records. Everyone within our community has relatively few resources. Maybe they have, a couple of IP address assignments or a handful. And so generally you pick sign up for hosted. And this is where ARIN provides a simple UI, that form, and what's needed to create and delete and change these ROAs. And it's all hosted within ARIN's environment. So everybody, I don't know of any exceptions in our community. Everybody picks sign up for hosted. And that's it. You do that, and then you can create ROAs to protect your network. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Oh, I see we've got a question here. So should we create a new form for each prefix? We have 3 subnets under the same AS. So yes, in general, you should only have one prefix on the form. Even though it allows you to pick more than one prefix, that's actually considered a bad practice. And you should create a new form for each prefix. But some things to think about. It matters in which order you create these. You have to create the longer or more specific prefix resources first. And if you have DDoS mitigation services that may originate your routes from a different origin AS, you have to think about that as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'm showing you how easy it is to create these resources or to create these records. But here's an offer. I would like to help you do this. And the way this normally works is an organization says, yeah, we want to have this protection. We're already paying for it. We want to fill out the form. And you send me an email, tell me some dates and times that you'd be able to fill out the form. We have a Zoom session. You share your screen. And I do a couple of things. Before I meet with you, I have an internal tool that allows me to look at the history of the routes you've announced for the last 10 years. And so, for example, occasionally I'll see parts of the IP space for a university being used maybe once a year for some sort of offsite event where they've they've carved out some IP space and they're announcing it a little bit differently for some sort of event that they're hosting. Or I see evidence that they have a DDoS scrubbing provider that sometimes will announce their routes differently. And so you would need to accommodate that. Or, I see some more complicated scenarios where somebody has IP space, but they've reassigned different parts of the IP space to different organizations. So I run internally. So I'm equipped with a bunch of information on how to create your ROAs. Generally, the ROAs are really simple, and you might just need one or a couple of them. Um, but but I can help you and have a second set of eyes on the form you're filling out so that we minimize the risk that filling it out incorrectly would cause an outage. So it's a really powerful form to fill out in a good way because it prevents certain misconfigurations and certain types of hijacks from affecting your internet connection. Again, it enables Internet2 and your other service providers to give you some protection that they can't otherwise do if the form isn't filled out. But if you fill the form out incorrectly, um, it could cause an outage. And generally people don't have experience doing this because it's new and it's not like you'll redo it. I mean, for most organizations, they'll fill this thing out once and then it won't change for years. And so uh, what I recommend is that people reach out. Happy to do this. That usually doesn't take very long. We might schedule a half-hour meeting and it might take 5 minutes. Um, so that's the message. It's important to do this because it provides an important piece of missing security for these networks. Um, and we're happy to walk you through it step by step. And if people want to do it on their own, that's fine. But we're happy to help you do this. So again, there's very little to the form to fill out. Um, filling understanding it's important to understand what your route announcements look like before you fill it out to make sure that you're filling it out correctly. Um, uh, and we want to help you with that. So I have a bunch of slides on planning your ROAs, and 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 so you're welcome. I'll send you a link to the slides. You're welcome to look at these slides, but this part can be a little more complicated. And again, it's not something that for most organizations don't have any experience doing this. And we're happy to do the planning and explain what we're doing and why it looks this way. So the slides are here, but it's been my experience that um, for many organizations, it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to get deep into the weeds in planning how to fill out that form. But I do have the slides here. The other thing that I'm going to skip ahead here. The other thing that we see more common is it's common for people to not have access to their ARIN account. So real common scenario is somebody worked at an organization and they were the person who had the credentials to log into the ARIN account, and then they retired or they moved on. And so you have this account, but you don't really have access to it, so you can't create the ROAs. And so I have a deck of slides here on what's called org ID recovery and how you go about recovering an account. So I'm going to stop with the slide presentations right here and try to answer your questions and do whatever I can to try and convince you should do this, you want to do this, and I'm happy just to help you do it.
So it's interesting that we got this meeting invite now because last week, so 2 years ago, I set up, alerting on Cloudflare Radar and Cisco Crosswork Cloud to see if our prefixes were being announced from any other AS. And that was, silent for 2 years until last week when our main prefix, our 199.87.1 prefix was announced from a Brazilian ISP, AS53013. Um, so I was actually looking into this to filling out a ROA. At the end of last week, I was looking into what to do, and this kind of just confirmed what we need to do. So thank you. This has been very helpful and very informative. So thank you for that.
And so I hear these stories. So the dramatic thing I talked about last summer was really very, I mean, there was critical infrastructure for a state that was taken down, but smaller things happen much more frequently. And in the last month, I met with people from Lonnie, the network in Louisiana, and people from Learn, the network in Texas, where I was helping them with their ROAs, and they had a story like yours. And I have to tell you that over 50% of the IP addresses uh, globally are protected by this, but within the U.S. higher education community, um, it's about a quarter. And so if somebody's looking to on purpose borrow some of these addresses, we are a much bigger target. Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, thanks for your story, and yeah, and I'm happy to help do this. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat. And I'm responsive if you send a request. I'm going to be out of the country next week, but normally I'm pretty responsive. We'll get right back with you, and usually it doesn't take very long.
Okay. Unfortunately, at the moment, I don't know who the person is that has our ARIN account. So that's why I haven't well, I've thought about doing this, but I haven't done it yet because of that.
So
So
if you do a who is on an IP address of yours,
Brian
uh,
Waltz comes up and he is still an employee here. He's Anthony's boss. So
okay.
I guess Anthony, can you hear me? We don't usually use Zoom for calls. We usually use Teams. We're a Teams org. Um, I guess we can talk internally and we'll email you and okay, he said you can hear. Um, I guess we'll talk internally and we'll figure out how we're going to approach this and and we'll contact you if we would like assistance. But it seems pretty simple to me. It seems like, you just put your AS number in, your one prefix, and then you do the max length for the prefix, and that's it. These forms seem to have three fields to them, and you just fill it out and make sure it's not wrong. You don't type the
Right.
wrong AS number, your network stops working.
Right. So I'll tell you something that happened Friday. There's a consultant that works for a higher ed institution, and and they were like, "Oh, this looks easy. I'll just do it." And he sent me a note saying, "Here's what I'm going to do." And in their case, they have a /16, but they announce it as 2/17. So they disaggregate it. And he was going to create the ROA for the 16. And that would have taken down their network. And so as soon as he was going to do it in minutes. And so he sends me this note saying, "Oh, I'm just going to do this." And I sent him a note saying, "Stop." Stop. So it is simple. Um, uh, but I'm happy to help anyone do this. And I've gotten a little gun shy, to be honest. And making it clear to people I'm really, of course, one of these days it'll all be my fault. Um, but yeah, is there a
So
specific? Go ahead.
There was a question from Brad Lenig about DDoS protection mitigation, if there's any documentation on that. And just for his information, I've never seen our 199.87 prefix announced from a different AS except for this event, last week. It actually happened 2 days in a row, shortly after midnight. Um, but other than that, I've never seen our. Oh, we just got it. Okay. Well, we would figure out what AS they announce, what AS they come from, and where we would want the traffic to go to, because that would be the point of that DDoS mitigation, is they're trying to send the attack traffic to more capable infrastructure that can handle it better, you know.
Right.
So,
So there is not one there isn't documentation for this, and it's complicated. So there's some DDoS mitigation services which uh, will announce more specifics. So they'll announce 24s to draw the subset of your traffic to them that's the attack traffic. Some of them will originate it from your AS. Some of them will originate it from their own AS. And in some cases, especially Radware customers in our community, it's a third AS. It is an AS that is maintained by the regional network that is the origination AS. And to make this even more bizarrely complicated, Radware's mechanism for letting their upstream transit providers know what routes they may send them requires that you create a ROA that doesn't obscure that information. I don't know of a simple way to describe this other than once you create a ROA, internet routing registries will suppress responses for records that are inconsistent with your ROA. And so in the Radware case, um, you may have to create three ROAs, one for the normal announcement from the campus, one from a diversion announcement from your regional network, and one to permit this route object to be visible once you create the ROAs. And so it's absurdly complicated and hard to explain. And that's just an example of why I'm happy to help with. I mean, only because I've been doing it for a bunch of different organizations. I mean, that no one gets experience doing this for one site. So that's um,
so from a 10,000-foot view here, would we just submit two additional ROAs for each prefix for the two additional ASs that may announce that prefix? Is that kind of
yeah. You just you so
do
here would be a
do it
typical
three, just do it two more times, basically?
yeah,
Okay.
and you don't want to use max length unless you have to, but for some DDoS scrubbing stuff, you really need to do that. So let's say you have a /16 and you announce it as a /16 normally. You create a row for that. And let's say that you have a DDoS scrubbing provider that originates it from their AS, but they originate a 24. You create a second ROA that has their AS, and that one you have max length 24 on. And so that would be sort of a typical response to that situation to create the ROAs. Um, and then again, as I was sharing, these are real things that I've come across. Every now and then, people will not remember that they loaned some of their space out for different reasons. And so like I said, we use RIPE has about 10 years worth of history for routing across the internet, and we just look all that up.
Um, I've looked at that tool before, and it's interesting to me that Ripe is the only RIR that has a really nice tool for BGP information. It seems like the other ones don't really have
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? I don't want to monopolize the conversation here.
Yeah, sure. I got one real quick. So we have a /24 that's pretty much unused. We play around with it for dev, things like that. Would it be all right? So, like, can we create a row just for that? I mean, it has no effect on any of our other prefixes or anything else we're announcing, right?
Yes, you can create a row for that. And in fact, um, there's a certain kind of row you can create to prevent a network from ever showing up in the internet. So let's say it's a /24 and you intend not to announce it.
Hmm.
You can create a row and list the origin AS as 0. And what that says is there's no valid origin AS. And so if you have IP space that you're not using, or maybe you're using it internally and for security reasons, you actually don't want it to leak out, you could create rows to prevent that. So you could create a row that would allow that route to exist when you do want to propagate it, or you could actually create a row to prevent it from ever being in the internet. Another question I get is when you fill the form out, how long till it takes to have an effect? And it'll start to have an effect for some networks in 15 minutes, and it will propagate to 95% of networks that are providing this protection within 2 hours. So the effect can be pretty quick, but the full effect takes a couple of hours. So if you're creating a ROA, and let's say you make a mistake when you create it, and you've mistyped the origin AS or something, and you made the mistake. If you know the mistake you've made, the best thing to do is to create another ROA that's correct first before you delete the other one. So depending on when the updates take place, that's usually a better strategy, because if any ROA shows that the route is valid, then the networks will accept the route. And so you make a ROA by mistake, immediately proceed to making the ROA correctly, and later you can remove the mistaken ROA.
Good to know. That was one of my follow-up questions. So thanks. I got one more, and since you brought up the ASN 0 thing, that's interesting because we have a /16 that we're winding down for sale in a few months. And do you see people do that just as a way as really just locking down that IP space so it doesn't get abused? Because that affects the sale as well, right? They look up abuse records and things.
Yeah, so there are IP leasing companies
Mhm.
that use ROA 0 to make sure that when the lease is over, no one's using the IP space.
Interesting.
And if you don't want it to be out there, because people will notice if you stop announcing it.
Mhm.
Then creating oh, and the other thing is this also demonstrate. So I spoke with a guy who's a specialist in selling IP addresses, and when you create a ROA, that's further demonstration that you actually control the IP space. That's yours to sell. And so sometimes that's helpful.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks.
Another thing that is interesting, if you want to, the major cloud providers have something called bring your own IP address. Now, normally, when you create a virtual network within a cloud provider, you can use any IP addresses you want. They can be private addresses or public addresses. It doesn't matter, because the provider, you have this virtual private cloud essentially, and the provider is not announcing your IP addresses. But Oracle, Google, and Amazon, and I'm sure others, and Microsoft all have a program where you can say, I'm going to use my real IP addresses, and I want you to announce them. So I'm going to benefit from your internet connectivity as well, maybe for disaster recovery or whatever. All those major public cloud providers, you have to create ROAs to do that. So creating the ROA is doing two things. It's one, it's telling them it's really yours, and you're saying that it's okay for them to originate them.
Okay.
Any other questions?
How about so I see you have manners, in your background there. Is there any group kind of collaborative groups like this that would get together to join that or anything? Is there anything further than ROAs, right, to join manners, right? I think there's more protections, right, you can apply.
Yeah, so you can become a manners participant, and uh, the you, you have to agree to do 4 things when as a network operator, although one of them is optional. But you um, uh, for a network operator, you need to make sure that your who is information regarding your resources is current. Um, an optional action, they call these things actions. An optional action is to ensure that um, you've configured your network so it won't leak uh, traffic that's had its source IP address spoofed. This is optional because for some network providers, it's not practical to do so. For example, it's nearly impossible for Internet2 to do that to make sure our connection to a regional network won't let spoofed addresses through, but it's pretty trivial for a campus to make sure that's true.
Mhm.
Um, the another thing is maintaining um, uh, IRR records that describe the routing policy of your network. And the nice thing about ARIN is if you create a ROA, when you create a ROA, you'll see a little box come up or a little screen come up that says that has a checked off box. And if you leave it checked, when you create a ROA, ARIN will automatically create a route object in their IRR for that prefix that you created the ROA for. And it's really rare that that's not what you want to do. So you want to leave the box clicked. And so that takes care of uh, ensuring that uh, you have route objects as well as ROAs. They have similar uses, but the uses are not quite the same. Um, and as this doesn't really apply to campuses too much, but it applies to like regional networks. The other thing is to be a manners participant, you need to agree to ensure that your customers actually hold the IP addresses and AS numbers that they're using. So, for example, if a new organization connects to Internet2 through a regional network, um, we don't automatically accept that route. The regional network tells us it's an authorized route to accept, and then we have a business process where we go look up the who is data and make sure that the organization that's using the IP addresses actually holds the IP addresses. And so if you agree to do those things, that's you can become a manners participant. And there is the internal discussions within manners about making ROAs a requirement.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool, thanks.
Anything else? So again, it's pretty painless to fill this form out. I have some tools that I can look up and see if there's anything unusual about how your routes have been announced over time. It's usually a short call. For a lot of folks, it's filling out the form for one record, and it's pretty simple. So far, I've not participated in any mistakes that have taken a network down. And I think this will become a standard of care. This will be something that people will question why it's not being done, especially if something happens. So so my message is, it's a good thing to do. I'm happy to help do it.
I'm a little late to the game because I had the wrong Zoom information, but does this how does this impact DDoS mitigation? Like
So it doesn't provide DDoS mitigation, but when you create these records, when you fill this form out, if you have a DDoS mitigation service, sometimes you have to have an additional copy of the form filled out to accommodate the routes that would come from your DDoS mitigation service provider. And it just depends on who that provider is.
Okay.
If you have these records for your own network and you sign up for DDoS, the DDoS people are going to notice you have this record and they're going to say, oh, you need to make this change. But if you already have DDoS mitigation, and you create this record, you need to ensure that the rows you're creating will allow the DDoS mitigation service to work as expected.
Gotcha. I assume like Radware and stuff are they obviously they take rows into account and stuff. Just since that's an I2.
Well, they do, but I will say that in particular, it's a little more complicated with Radware in that it's common for the organization to have to create 3 ROAs for every prefix they have if they have Radware.
Huh. Okay.
But we can help you with that.
Okay.
And the third ROA is just it's because of how Radware communicates to their transit providers the set of routes that they might announce to them. So Radware, will send your route to transit providers to draw the attack traffic, and they have to communicate to the transit providers. Here's the list of potential routes you would see from us. So you can build a filter and only accept the ones you would expect to see from us.
Gotcha.
And you have to create an extra ROA to make sure that doesn't get messed up.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I want to apologize for the Zoom confusion. I'm pretty sure that I think I scheduled a meeting and had an Outlook create a Zoom meeting link, and then I probably created a manual one for the webinar and didn't think, oh, those are 2 different links. I went to the wrong link initially, as did all the KeystoneREN staff that had that calendar invite. So thanks for putting up with that, and I apologize for the confusion.
It's the world we live in. It's no problem.
Yeah. So.
Steve, you're being generous. I already accepted full blame and said I must have fat fingered it. So you should have just said it was Jennifer's fault. But I echo his sentiments and apologies, folks, for jumping around. But we're glad you made it here. And Steve, we want to thank you so much for, taking the time to reach out to the KeystoneREN community specifically, to make yourself available for this webinar, and then to also offer the very generous option to have you present with each of the KeystoneREN campuses as they go through this process. So if Mark or anyone missed that, the offer stands to have Steve, really jump on a call with you to go through this, be right by your side. So take them up on that if you can. I think it's a great offer, and we really appreciate it, Steve.
All right. Thank you. You guys
Yeah, that's great.
have a good rest of your Monday.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
You too.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you, sir. Take care, guys.
Take care all. Bye-bye.